Imagine for a moment that you open a history book about the life of Julius Caesar, and, in the middle of a description of the Gallic Wars, you find a paragraph where the great Roman general consults his wristwatch to check the time before crossing the Rubicon. You would immediately dismiss it as a fictional error or a bad joke, wouldn't you? An object that does not belong to its time immediately betrays the hand of a later author. Well, modern zooarchaeology has just posed an identical dilemma for the most influential book in humanity, the Bible. Genesis describes the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, surrounded by large caravans of camels in what we traditionally call the Bronze Age. However, the skeletal remains unearthed in the Levant are conclusive. These animals were not mass domesticated as beasts of burden until centuries after the supposed time of Abraham. This is not a simple biological detail. It is a temporal fingerprint. If the camel should not be there, what does this error tell us about the true date the Bible was written? Today, we delve into the trenches of Megiddo and the archives of the Kingdom of Judah to solve the mystery of who the real authors were behind the foundational myth of the West. To understand the magnitude of this conflict, we must place ourselves on the battlefield of traditional biblical archaeology. For decades, figures like the celebrated William Foxwell Albright sought to validate the patriarchal accounts as precise historical chronicles. Albright searched for traces of nomadic shepherds in the second millennium before our era, convinced that archaeology would confirm Abraham's biography exactly as we read it in Genesis. Under this perspective, the Amorite migration was proposed as the historical framework where Abraham and his family would have arrived in Canaan from Mesopotamia. However, 21st century science, led by researchers such as Israel Finkelstein, has shattered that mirror of faith. By excavating at Megiddo, an artificial hill, or citadel, containing 25 superimposed cities, archaeologists discovered that the strata corresponding to 1800 before the Common Era do not show a desolate landscape inhabited by nomads, but rather a complex fabric of fortified city-states, with monumental temples and palaces that contradict the narrative of a population vacuum. But the definitive blow to the historicity of the second millennium came from an unexpected place: the osteological record. Excavations at Tel Yeme, a key trade center on the coastal plain, revealed a sudden increase in domestic camel remains, only starting from the 7th century before the Common Era. Before the year 1000 before the Common Era, the camel simply was not part of the Levant's burden economy. This anachronism is the first thread that, when pulled, unravels a much larger tapestry. The landscape described in the Bible, filled with camels and Philistines in the time of Isaac, is not the world of the 18th century before the Common Era, but the world of the 7th century before the Common Era. The authors of the Bible were describing their own present, their own geography, and their own power dynamics, projecting them toward a heroic and legendary past to provide it with legitimacy. The anthropological question then shifts from who was Abraham to who needed Abraham to exist in the 7th century. The knot of the mystery tightens when we analyze other ghosts from the future within the sacred text. Genesis repeatedly mentions the Philistines and their king Abimelech in the city of Gerar during the time of Isaac. However, the archaeological record and Egyptian archives are clear. The Philistines, known as the Sea Peoples, did not arrive on the coasts of Canaan until the 12th century before the Common Era, approximately 600 years after the patriarch's supposed life. Furthermore, excavations at Tel Haror, identified as ancient Gerar, demonstrate that in the Bronze Age, it was nothing more than an insignificant village. It was only under the rule of the Assyrian Empire, in the 7th century, before the Common Era, that Gerar became a fortified bastion of vital strategic importance. Why is this detail relevant? Because it reveals that the author of the text was familiar with Assyrian Gerar, not Bronze Age Gerar. The same occurs with the story of Joseph, when his brothers sell him to a caravan carrying balm, gum, and resin. They are describing the star products of the lucrative Arabian trade, overseen by the Neo-Assyrian Empire between the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era. These products were the backbone of the regional economy in the time of King Josiah, not in the remote antiquity of the patriarchs. This conflict between the text and the earth leads us to a political revelation. The names, nations, and geographical conflicts mentioned in the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob exactly reflect the geopolitical situation of Judah in the 7th century before our era. The Arameans, who dominate the stories of Jacob and Laban, do not appear as a distinct ethnic group before 1100 before the Common Era. But in the 8th century, they were Israel's direct rivals for the control of Galilee. The biblical genealogies that disparage peoples like the Moabites and Ammonites, attributing incestuous origins to them after the fall of Sodom, are actually political satires created by Judahite authors who saw them as contemporary enemies. The Bible is not a fossil record. It is a living map of the 7th century before the Common Era, designed to justify the territorial ambitions and survival of a small kingdom trapped between the claws of the Assyrian and Egyptian empires. We thus reach the climax of our investigation. In the year 622, before the Common Era, according to the 2nd Book of Kings, an event occurred that changed the course of history. The discovery of a lost Book of the Law in the Temple of Jerusalem during renovations, ordered by King Josiah. Most modern scholars agree that this book was an early version of Deuteronomy, and that its finding was not a miracle, but rather the most successful propaganda maneuver of antiquity. Judah was experiencing an existential crisis. The northern kingdom, Israel, had been annihilated by the Assyrians in 722 before the Common Era, leaving a multitude of hungry and resentful refugees flooding into Jerusalem. Josiah needed to unify these two peoples, the northerners, who brought the traditions of Jacob, and the southerners, who guarded those of Abraham, under one God, one king, and one temple. The royal scribes performed an unprecedented operation of social engineering. They wove disparate local traditions into a single, linear, national epic. They joined Abraham, the hero of the South based in Hebron, Isaac, the bridge, and Jacob, the father of the northern tribes, into a single family genealogy to say, "We are not strangers. We are brothers under the same covenant." The anachronism of the Camels and the Philistines was not an oversight. It was the use of the language and power symbols of their time to make history familiar and convincing to their 7th century audience. The revelation is profound. The Bible was not born from the peace of the desert, but from the political urgency of a nation that refused to be erased from the map. By centralizing worship in Jerusalem and prohibiting sacrifices anywhere else, Josiah not only consolidated religion, but also centralized the economy and state control. The truth of the patriarchs is not found in the carbon-14 of camel bones, but in the genius of a people who were able to reinvent their past to secure their future. Modern archaeology has not destroyed the Bible. On the contrary, it has endowed it with a new and fascinating human dimension by understanding that the Camel Enigma is the key to dating the composition of Genesis to the 7th century before the Common Era. We discover a masterpiece of cultural resistance. The patriarchs cease to be mere clay figures and become the ethical archetypes of a nation that, faced with the threat of extinction, chose the pen over the sword to survive empires. But now, the question is for you. Do you believe that knowing the Bible is a political and literary construction of the 7th century detracts from its spiritual value? Or on the contrary, does it make it more fascinating as proof of the resilience of human thought? I'll read your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to continue unearthing the secrets of our civilization. Give a like if you value academic rigor, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of Chronicles of Thought.